I have a question. Does it matter if you call him Jesus or Yeshua or Yahuwah? Does it matter? Joshua? Does that really matter? I've heard people say, I've heard people use the argument that J's didn't exist. They didn't use J's back then. I see people saying even stuff like, when you're saying Jesus, you're talking about Zeus somehow, all this stuff. Does it really matter? Well, personally, I think if we believe in God the way we say we do, if we believe that in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and it goes on and goes on. If we believe that, and we really believe that God created this earth, and that Jesus Christ also was a part of creation, was a part of creating the world, according to John. And when you think about the Tower of Babel in Genesis, when it says, that the Lord pretty much broke all that up and divided them and divided the languages, and they, excuse me, and they no longer understood each other the way they did, and they all had different languages. If we believe that, why do we not believe somehow that God doesn't understand us? Because in our current translation, we call Jesus, Jesus, Now, I'm not saying that you're wrong for wanting to, call him in maybe the native tongue, or, you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I equally don't think it's wrong to call him based off your native tongue. Because here's the thing. You may call him Yeshua, but everything else you say is in your own native tongue, which is not the same as where Yeshua comes from. Most of the people don't speak Hebrew, don't speak Aramaic, they don't speak any of those languages. Most people speak what they speak. You see what I'm saying? So I think it's kind of a bit, I don't know, I just don't follow the logic where, like, I understand both sides. I understand on one end where you're like, no, I want to call him what he was called. But my thing is, we're in this current day that we're in, what about the other native languages that don't speak that language? What about Asians, Chinese people? What about the Chinese believers? They don't they may not necessarily call him Jesus. They may not necessarily call him Yeshua. So are you saying that because they don't call him those two names, that somehow, their faith isn't credited to them? Because I don't know, I find that hard to believe. I personally think that it's okay for them to call him how his name translates into their language, into the English language, American English, we say Jesus. So to think that somehow God, who created all this, somehow, and Jesus somehow doesn't understand us, or doesn't necessarily want to respond to our prayers, or whatever you're thinking, because we're not using the name, or if you think he's responding to you more because you are using that name, then I don't know, it presents an interesting situation. It presents an interesting question, or something to consider. I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not saying that, I saw a video of someone that said that they felt that God led them to stop saying Jesus and to start calling him Yeshua, because that's his name. Like I've seen multiple people say things like that. And I have to, I mean, again, I'm not here to tell you, one thing I can't ever do is in most situations, I can't tell you what God said to you. You know what I mean? Like, unless you give me some crazy thing that just doesn't make sense. But generally speaking, I won't tell you what God said to you. That's not my place to, I'm not in your relationship with God. I can't come in between that. So I can't tell you, oh, he didn't tell you to stop calling him Jesus and to only call him Yeshua. That's not my place to tell you. But me just trying to be logical here, again, what about someone and someone that's Hispanic and they say Jesus? You mean to tell me because they're calling him Jesus that somehow, some way Jesus isn't, you see what I'm saying? Like somehow, some way Jesus don't want to hear their prayers because they're calling him Jesus. Someone in Africa, someone in Brazil or Portugal, you know how they speak Portuguese. You mean to tell me because they're not calling him Yeshua, you mean to tell me that somehow Jesus ain't trying to, he don't want to hear them, he don't want to answer their prayers, or he's going to deal with them differently and deal with the person that's calling him Yeshua? He's going to give them special treatment, even more so, just because of them calling him by that name? Me personally, I don't really believe that. I don't. I look at it like, this guy calls the car red. This guy calls the car rojo. This other guy calls the car Maidai. And let's just pretend that Maidai means red in some language that I just made up right here on the spot, right? So we got red, rojo, and Maidai. And then now they're arguing with each other and they're like, oh no, like, the guy that says red goes to the guy that's saying rojo. And he's like, hey, you're saying it wrong. You're supposed to say red. And the guy's like, no, you're supposed to say rojo. And the other guy's like, hey, you guys are both wrong. You're supposed to say Maidai. Meanwhile, in their own native tongues, they're all saying the same thing. So I just think it's a little, I don't know, I think it's a little trivial for us to be caught up on that. And I think we're limiting God. Like we're placing our earthly beliefs and our earthly logic and reasoning on God, who is all logic and all reasoning and all knowing. You see what I'm saying? Like, he gave us the language to begin with. So why would he not understand you in whatever language that you're trying to speak? He knows what's on your mind. You know what I mean? He knows your heart of your mind. You know what I mean? No pun intended with the channel. You feel me? But he knows. So, like, I don't know. I just don't. And again, feel free to disagree with me. I by no means am the authority on this subject or any subject. I'm just trying to look at this. And maybe someone may have been in between on this and they heard this and heard that. Hey, for me, I say call him how you were called. If you were called and you got to know him as Jesus, I personally think keep using Jesus. Now if you want to use Yeshua and Jesus, and I don't think there's anything wrong with either of the two. If you speak a different language and in your language you call him something else, call him what you call him in your language, and don't let no one try and make you feel like you're not righteous or you're not a believer or God's not hearing your prayers because you're not calling him what they think you should call him. Again, this is just my opinion, and long story short, I think we're limiting God. It's like you're saying, like, God isn't smart enough to know the language that you're using to call him. I think more importantly is what's on your mind when you call him. You see what I'm saying? I think that's more important than calling him Yeshua or Jesus, or I think in one of the, like in the Greek Bibles, it was like Eosis, or It's like spelled I-E-O, something like that. Y'all, if you look it up, you'll see what I'm saying. I don't know how to say it, but I just feel like Christos, was it Christos? Christos? Is that like Greek or some? I don't know, but if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. But I personally just don't think that these translations per se, not saying they don't matter at all, because I'm sure if you can really speak the native tongue, then speak it. But, you know, you call him Yeshua, but then the rest of your prayer is in your native tongue. Because most people don't speak Hebrew, or most people don't speak the native language that he was called when he was here on the earth, physically at least. So you call him Yeshua, but then you go back to speaking English and say, you know, X, Y, and Z, but it's all in English. But then the one word you say is in Hebrew is Yeshua, and then you go back to English. You see what I'm saying? Like, you're still speaking in your native tongue. So if you really believe that you got to call him Yeshua, then I would think you would also have to have your whole prayer and your whole message in that same language as well, according to the logic that that person is using. You know, according to that logic, if you believe that calling him Yeshua is what you're supposed to call him, and that you shouldn't call him Jesus, then I would also think, okay, well then you should make your whole prayer be in that native tongue of Yeshua and where that is derived from. Otherwise, the rest of the things that you're saying, according to that logic, wouldn't be understood, or wouldn't also be, you know, received, so to say. I don't know, just something to think about. It's just something I'm thinking about, you know, because I see these conversations going on, and I'm just putting in my 2 cents, you know. Maybe you disagree or whatever it is, and, you know, we can respectfully disagree. You can give me your feedback. But can you at least follow my logic here? That's, you know, if you at least follow my logic. I just don't want nobody being tied up on this. And if you're confused on what should I call him, I would say call him how you were called. If you were called through a certain name, Jesus, if you were called through Jesus, call him Jesus. If you were called through Jesus, call him Jesus. If you were called through Yeshua, call him Yeshua. Like, however you were called, call him. And then as you progress in your faith and you develop, if you feel so inclined to call him something else, or move on and move up, and, or, you know, move however you feel you're being moved, then do, you know, that's between you and God. I can't speak on another man or another woman's relationship with God. That's between you and God. But I just wouldn't get so hung up on that. All right? Again, it's your boy, Yakliel. Just wanted to give you my 2 cents on that. Hearts of mind. Remember, what's on your mind is what's of your heart. Thank you for watching. Peace.